Good day to everyone, and thank you for joining the LHH ICEO Practice Executive Conversation Series as we welcome Jonathan Polk, our guest today. I am Sally Washlow, one of the practice leads for the ICEO practice in North America. ICEO is a strategic partner to organizations and leaders offering executive career advisory services within a global boutique. Our team of advisors are accomplished business leaders and board directors who draw upon their deep experience to provide trusted counsel backed by a personalized team of industry and functional experts to support the unique needs of each client. Our service offerings include executive mentoring, onboarding, succession management, retirement, and career transitions. Our program today will run about 45 minutes, leaving time at the end for Q&A and wrap-up. We invite you to use the Q&A and chat function for your questions, and my ICEO colleagues will be supporting me in monitoring the questions. Today, we have an amazing guest, Jonathan Polk. Jonathan's insights on how a career arc can take shape over time and the North Stars that guided his decision-making along the way will make for a rich discussion. Jonathan, thank you for joining us, and may I call you JP?
Sure.
Terrific. JP, you have had an interesting career, and let me share with the members of our group today the highlights that will help frame our discussion. It
Great.
started at Cornell Law School, and then to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where you got your grounding as a general practitioner and regulatory lawyer in New York's Fed legal group. Then over time, you began to focus on litigation, where a special unit was formed to investigate and prosecute major enforcement cases and civil litigation. You then left the enforcement unit to head the anti-money laundering, corporate compliance, and consumer compliance examination functions with a team of more than 70 examiners. In 2008, you moved to and eventually led the AIG monitoring team during the Great Recession. And in your last role at the Fed, you returned to the Bank Supervision Group to serve as a senior supervisory officer responsible for the oversight of Citigroup. So an amazing career at the Fed and several years practicing commercial litigation at Miller and Rubel along the way. You then made a leap to join the commercial side and joined American Express, where you initially went to establish and lead the global regulatory affairs team. During your 8 years at American Express, you took on a variety of additional responsibilities, including the CEO of the $50 billion card issuing bank, head of international banking, and responsible for a large team of second-line risk managers at American Express's international operations. In the last 2 years, you've been serving as general counsel and chief compliance officer at Melio Payments, a rapidly growing digital payments provider to small and medium-sized businesses where you're thriving and having a great time. Something tells me we have an interesting discussion ahead of us, full of learnings and insights for our participants. So I think a good place to start with all of that is at the beginning. One of your major career moves, the foundational one that set your path, was the decision to forsake the more conventional choice of joining a big law firm right out of law school and go to the New York Fed. Can you tell us a little bit about that decision?
Absolutely, Sally. And before I say anything else, let me say thanks so much for having me and how much I enjoy doing this kind of thing. So I'm looking forward to it and glad to be here. So when I started out, I was interested in doing something that was going to be meaningful to me and something that I would really enjoy. And when I was talking to my friends at law school, it seemed like the only question anybody was really asking themselves was whether they wanted to be in a corporate practice or a litigation practice. And some people actually did a little bit of both in a year of sort of orientation before they chose, but that was the range of options for most of my contemporaries in law school. And I found myself having conversations with my law school advisor, who became an important source of guidance to me. And that's actually a theme, Sally, I'll mention over and over again while we're talking today. I've relied repeatedly and over time on advisors, and it's really been very important in my development, my education, and the choices I've made. And my law school advisor had a former student who went to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, an organization I knew nothing about, but he suggested, based on my interests, that I might want to talk to her. He introduced me, and that resulted in me going there. And so right from the get-go, it was an advisor who played a key role in my initial choice to go to the Fed. And then more about the Fed, I would tell you this. One is, it provided me with an opportunity to do a variety of things as an in-house lawyer, but at the same time develop some expertise in bank supervision and regulation, which I found interesting, even though I didn't know what it was going to be like. Also, it's an opportunity at the Fed, at least, to operate at levels that are very, very out of sync with your seniority. Lawyers start off at the Fed and they're stuck on the front lines, and there's no going to the library and writing research memos. You basically were a practicing lawyer right from the beginning of your career, something that I found very appetizing. And then I would say there was a quality of the people and prestige of the organization that appealed to me, because the Fed is truly an extraordinary organization. It's not one that I was familiar with when I first found out about it, but learned that it really is a special place, and that paid off in spades for me. So I was very lucky to go there and had a wonderful experience.
I think we will hear today a lot about advisors and even leaps of faith that you took as well. So thank you for sharing that. After leaving the Fed for a time to learn about litigation and trial work, you did move to a firm, Miller and Rubel, but then you decided to go back to the Fed. Can you share with us why you made that decision?
Absolutely. So first, Miller and Rubel, I went there because I actually had a year and a half out of law school. I had a trial in federal court where I was first chair. And that's sort of fitting what I said about getting a level of responsibility out of proportion with your experience. And after that trial, I had more trial experience than anyone else inside the legal group at the Fed. And since I had an interest in litigation, I decided I should go to a place where that's what they do for a living. Miller and Rubel is a boutique litigation firm, excellent firm, and I was delighted to go there and learn something about how to do litigation. And so that was an extraordinary experience for me. But when my former boss created a division dedicated to investigating and prosecuting bank fraud, I was very attracted to the opportunity to do something that was in the public interest. And while commercial litigation was interesting and challenging, I found what I missed from my days at the Fed was the public purpose. And so if I'm going to add a second theme to my first one, which is advisors, my second theme would be mission. It became apparent to me while I was doing commercial litigation, I wanted to do something that was meaningful for me and motivating. And the opportunity to go back to the Fed presented that opportunity to do some work that was really important.
Thank you for sharing. I think I would like to bring in a little bit here about why you joined Melio and their mission and what attracted you to them as well. We've been talking a lot about the Fed and Miller and Rubel, but I think that theme plays in here as well.
It does. Thank you for prompting me, because I meant to say that. So I would tell you that Melio is really all about helping small businesses thrive and succeed. Melio is a B2B business payments company. And basically what that means to me is that we help small businesses pay their bills, manage their cash flow, manage the workflow associated with paying their bills, reconcile their financial records, prepare for taxes, and all of that stuff. And small businesses are, apart from being really important parts of our economy, are really in very important ways wholesome and special parts of our culture. Small business people are passionate about what they do. They're integral to the fabric of the communities that they operate in. They hire more than any other type of employer in the United States. And they produce wonderful things, artisan products and things that are the product of love and passion. And that resonates with me personally. I love the idea of working at a place where our mission is to help small businesses, and attracted me very much to Melio.
Thank you for sharing. I think your journey has been so interesting, and to move from this run at an enforcement unit at the Fed, you made some pretty big changes when you were at the Fed as well. You left the legal group, joined the bank supervision group. Then you moved from the bank supervision group to the AIG team during the crisis. I'd love to hear more about that. And then moved back to the bank supervision group to run the Citigroup team. These are interesting moves. They're far from trivial as well. First, a lawyer leaving a practice to move to another group, and then serve in somewhat unusual roles with a person with a legal background. Can you provide us with some insight why you made a lot of these moves?
Absolutely. Yeah. So at the time that I moved from the legal group to the bank supervision group, it was actually a very unusual thing to do. Most of the lawyers at the Fed who start at the Fed finish their career, at least at the Fed, practicing law. Moving between groups wasn't a usual thing. So for me, it seemed like a very big leap at the time. But what I learned about myself was that I needed a change. I had spent by that time about 13 years doing the enforcement work. And I felt like while cases differed from one to the next, and they're fascinating, each based on their facts and the particular circumstances of the case, there was a certain process and cadence to life that became very familiar. And I learned about myself that familiarity was not good for me, that I needed to get out of my comfort zone, that I needed to be things to be unsettled. And I didn't think about it in those terms. I just started getting ants in my pants, and I started running around the building talking to people about who I might work with, what else I might do. When I spoke to the head of the bank supervision group, who was someone I had a very good relationship with, he said, I think you'd be perfect for running our AML team and compliance team. And I said, that sounds great. It's at least plausible there's a connection. Some of the enforcement cases I did were in money laundering and related issues. And so the need for change was an important part. And the second point I'd make, Sally, is this. I was really the instigator there. The bank supervision leader did invite me to join his group, but he wouldn't have done that, I don't think, if I didn't come speak to him about whether he had something I might be able to do. And that's a theme that repeats itself throughout my career as well. I agitated for change. I bet a lot of people that you speak to will tell you, yeah, I was so happy in my role. I never would have thought of changing. And someone called me. And so, yeah, I agreed to speak to them. I was out there pounding the pavement when I moved to the bank supervision group. And similarly, when I left the compliance job and went to the AIG team, like I was relentless in pursuing that one. I will tell you that I think the people that were running that team eventually decided to hire me on it because it was easier to have me on the team than to be fielding the calls I was making to them every day. And so maybe that's not a glamorous thing to say, but it's true. I did not wait to be asked. I'm proud of that in its own way, but it's definitely true. I went after these things. They didn't come to me.
Yeah. I really appreciate that theme of don't wait to be asked, and maybe slightly off a few of our topics here, but I do want to dig in a little bit further to that. On any of these opportunities as you moved throughout, did you ever have time frame set up of that I'm going to go do litigation for X amount of years? Or was it more, as you said, I'd answered my pants and I wanted to get moving to something else? So the main part of the question is, did you have time frame set up, or was it just you sensed it was time to move?
I wish I could tell you that there was a plan.
Yeah.
It was completely organic. The thing that we haven't hit on yet, and I know we talked about maybe covering this, so I'll anticipate it just a little bit about self-actualization. Uh, and so a thing that was very important to me was that I was excited to go to work in the morning, that I was enjoying the actual activity that I was engaged in, that I was actually invested in the work in a deep and meaningful way. And when that started to fade, it wasn't hard for me to tell. And so my timeframes for decision making were more situational and how I was feeling at the time than the result of some master plan.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that leads nicely into, um, we've heard you talk about the importance of self-actualization. Can you share how that played into your work at the Fed and how this contributed to, let's talk about moving from the Fed to American Express?
Yes, so absolutely. So I said that I put great emphasis on feeling invested and energized in what I was doing. And one of the things that became clear to me as I made changes was just for my own personal happiness and well-being. I liked uncertainty. I liked unfamiliar circumstances, and I was happy operating in ambiguity.
Mhm.
And so I think as I sort of got the courage of my convictions over time, particularly on the AIG team, wherein I got into something that was so wildly different from anything I had previously done, I really developed an appetite for the unfamiliar, for things that felt less certain. And so leaving the Fed, where things are pretty safe and predictable, to American Express, which is another large institution, but nevertheless very different, commercial, government, private sector, all of those things. I think I had developed a risk tolerance, so to speak, that I wouldn't have previously had. I certainly wouldn't have had it in year 4, 5, or even 10 of my career. But with the changes I had made, I found like I thrived in change. I liked it. I liked being in the unfamiliar circumstance. It gave me fire in my belly and energy to go to work. And so I was able to sort of get up the courage to leap out of the Fed and go to American Express.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we're getting a great picture of some key themes: mission and purpose, need for intellectual challenge, and getting to do some cool and interesting work. Um, but from our conversation, I gather American Express, want to dig a little deeper into that, stretch you to grow in some new kinds of ways. I mean, public sector to, a company now that's publicly traded. I think our participants would be interested to hear about how you experience the importance of leadership at American Express and their culture, and how did that contribute to your personal growth as a leader?
Yes, this was really an entirely new chapter for me. When I went to American Express, I encountered an environment where leadership was practiced as an art form, where leaders were told the people that are entrusted to your care are a precious resource of the organization, where your primary function as a leader is to nurture their development, to cultivate talent, to showcase them, and to help the people that you're leading make increasing and significant contributions to the organization overall. And that work was actually more emphasized and more prized than individual contribution, which it became clear to me makes sense, because no matter how productive any one person is, if you can make a bunch of people productive, you're making a net bigger impact than you can ever do on your own. So that all makes a ton of sense to me. And I embraced that, and then found at American Express there were extraordinary resources at my disposal to learn about and to evolve my skills and capabilities as a leader. And I don't mean to suggest by saying these things that somehow I've become some kind of perfect leader. Far from it. I can tell you, Sally, day in and day out, I make errors in leadership, and so don't want to suggest anything other than that. All I'm really saying here is that leadership was the name of the game in that environment. It was highly valued, and it was there were lots of people around me that modeled the kind of behaviors I wanted to imitate, and I learned a lot about it. And when I think about my time at American Express, there were a ton of things I learned, but the emphasis on leadership and how much enjoyment I get out of doing things related to leadership really stands out as a key attribute or feature of that period.
I think, though, that you share a little bit of that, of saying, I'm not a perfect leader, and self-actualization is part of that as well as a leader. So I think that's a great theme to share with those today, and appreciate that from your view, that we are constantly learning as leaders as well.
No doubt.
So, JP, I've heard you talk a lot about taking leaps beyond your comfort zone, building resilience necessary to operate outside of one's comfort zone. You have a tolerance to navigate risk and uncertainty. With that as a frame, can you discuss what it was like to take your most recent leap to your role at Melio, and what made that possible?
Yes. So I think the first thing I would say to that, Sally, is that really I could never have made the move to where I am now without having made all the other moves I made beforehand. I am convinced that if I was presented with this opportunity 8 years ago or 12 years ago, I wouldn't have either been ready for it or open to it. So I think everything I've done in retrospect has actually aligned neatly to deliver me to this moment in time. I think that in the past, I've served as both a lawyer and a client. I've served as both a regulator and a regulated person, or at a regulated entity. Things like that gave me, again, the courage of my convictions to come here and think that based on the totality of that experience, I would be able to add something. And so that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that the truth of the matter is that I got some excellent guidance and support from LHH. So I would like to call you and your colleagues out.
Thank you.
For having played an instrumental role in my decision-making. Really extraordinary resources to help as I navigated from one place to another, figuring out like what mattered to me, how to be intentional in the process, exploring alternatives, evaluating alternatives, researching things. You can't take the risk out of such a leap altogether, but you can mitigate it by thinking about it in a sensible way. And apart from the fact that I think I did preparation through my whole career, I had some excellent advisors once again in my corner, and that made a big difference.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for acknowledging the support that you got from our team as well as you made this journey. I want to add in another part of this question here that we discussed. When you think about all the transitions that you made, what have you found that was the hardest and most gratifying aspects of some of these changes over the years?
Sure, sure. So I'll start with the hardest. You mentioned it first and then go to most gratifying. So hardest, one is when you make a leap like some of the ones we've been discussing, you kind of hit the reset button on your credibility, on your brand, on your any kind of capital. You start with zero. And that's a big deal. I spent 23 years at the Fed before I went to American Express. And by the time I left the Fed, I knew the senior leadership. I knew how things worked. They knew me. I certainly would stub my toe from time to time, but they'd go, "Oh, that's JP. He does that from time to time. Fine." You know, you go to a new place, you have no grace yet, and you have to build that from the ground up. That's certainly an opportunity, but it's also a hill to climb. The second thing is there are networks of people within these places that know each other and have been working together forever. At the Fed, you know, they used to joke, we were born in medical. We've been here our whole life. And at American Express, there were many, many relationships, particularly in the senior leadership team, that had been formed over many years. They were comfortable with each other. They had lives together outside the office. And when you're the new person, you kind of have to, in some way, to some extent, infiltrate all that and find a way to have a working relationship with people that don't know you and don't necessarily have a reason to listen to you. As a matter of fact, when I was at Citigroup, one of the people that I liked talking to there, he was the chairman of the banking organization, which was a big part of Citigroup, but not all of it. And he actually sat me down before I left and he said, "Listen, you know, as a regulator, I have to take your call. You're going to go to Amex. People don't have to take your call. You better get used to that. And you better give them a reason to pick up the phone when you call them." And that's really true. It was, you know, an eye opener for me. That's something that's important. So I'd say those are some of the challenges. Some of the things that are gratifying, maybe to state the obvious, which never stops me, Sally, it gives you a sense of accomplishment, right? I do feel like I've been terribly fortunate to do all the different things I've done, but I also feel very proud that I was able to do them. So there's a sense of accomplishment in all of this for me, and I continue to feel it today. A second benefit, I think, is learning. I do think that the change in and of itself requires adaptation and learning that you wouldn't have to do, even in a job that remains fairly consistent, right? Mm-hmm. Experts that do things for many years are always learning. I don't mean to suggest anything other than that, but for me at least, changing the game, changing the environment, changing the players, changing the responsibilities is a catalyst for learning for me and tremendously gratifying. And then the last thing I would tell you is that, as I mentioned earlier, but I'll repeat it, all of the evolution and change over time brought out, for me, the best in me. And I value that. I value feeling like I'm operating at the limit of my capabilities. And so that all is tremendously gratifying.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about, I'll go back to the beginning, this thread of advisors that you had at the beginning of your career at law school, and then the advisors that supported you as you looked to this role at Melio. Was there a common theme as well throughout your career on advisors and support?
I suppose there was. I would say, you know, for me at least, I would have to be able to connect with my advisors. I have a hard time taking advice from people I can't connect with. That may not be unique, but it was certainly true in my case. I'd say also people that took an interest in me. I was very fortunate. The people who had the biggest impact on my life were people that I thought were genuinely in my corner, trying to help me, cared about me, and that was certainly true with respect to the people who influenced me the most over those years. I'm not sure what else I'd say, Sally, those couple of things at least.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's important, the advisory aspect of things. I think one more question here before we go to Q&A, which we have some as well. Can you bring to life the differences in the experience you had between your work at the Fed, American Express, and Melio?
So these three places are a study in contrast. Extraordinary differences, Sally. I don't even know where to begin. I'd say one thing to point out for sure is the cultures varied tremendously from one place to the next. The Fed was animated by public interest. People went there to do good things. Maybe not every single person. I think a lot of people, and the people I associated with, really animated by the public interest. And you felt it in everything. Is this good for the economy? Is this good for the banks we supervise? I don't know if the public always gives the Fed credit for that. We won't have to touch that for now. But from my perspective, when I was there, that's the way it felt to me. At American Express, it was about the customer. And it was about making money, and it was about growth and commercial opportunity. And the nice thing about it was that by the key to growth, development, and success was finding new and better ways to serve the customers and to back them up and to get them out of tight circumstances and to help them achieve whatever their goals were, whether it's personal goals to have an experience or business goals to do whatever kind of expansion they have in mind, driving commerce and sales and making commercial investments in their businesses. And Melio, a different sense altogether, helping businesses with their infrastructure and with paying bills, but aligning at a very, very ground level way. And really connecting with our customers on a one-by-one basis, because that's the stage of development we're at. We really do have tight and important relationships with our customers, and people here are animated by that mission. I can tell you that, Sally. The other contrast, I would say, is with respect to pace. Like the Fed, pretty deliberate organization. Nobody runs around with their hair on fire at the Fed. At Amex, I found another gear. Things started to speed up. Things happened fast. Now at Melio, it's like turbochargers. Things happen one day to the next. I've been here for 2 years. I think they're dog years. It's been extraordinary how much has happened, how much activity and energy comes every single day. Those are a couple of the differences. Let me pause there and see if that's good, or if you'd like to go in a different direction.
I think that's very helpful for our audience, and maybe we could touch upon. I love the pace that you're going at Melio. Maybe share a little bit about the culture of Melio and the various aspects of the geographic locations and how that plays into how Melio operates. It's a lot different than American Express or the Fed to walk into this type of culture as well.
Yeah, I think this is a good place to mention geography as an influencer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one thing, the obvious thing is time zones. That just affects the way life is. My colleagues in Tel Aviv wake up 7 hours before I do. So by the time I check my email, they've had a lot of chances to make mischief. And I find a backlog of messages every single day waiting for me as soon as I log on to my computer or check my phone. That's one thing. A second thing, and this was true at the Fed too. I had teams in India and Mexico. But in this situation, the differences between the US and Israel, like there are different cultural rhythms and holidays, and they, not so big on Father's Day over there, but they have a lot of other holidays. And so tons and tons of different kinds of things that are times of their life and times of the year and how they spend their time that aren't synchronized with ours. And I find that enriching. It's also sometimes a hunt to find time when everybody's online and working, but there's different sort of cultural rhythms for sure. There is also, to be candid, there are different communication styles. And I can tell you there's a difference between talking to someone in Japan and India on the one hand, or someone in Israel on another. And the energy and the directness and the warmth and passion that I experience day in and day out with my Israeli colleagues is awesome. I love it, and it's different from anything else I've ever experienced. I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it brings a dimension to work that is different from anything else I've ever experienced.
That's terrific. And thank you for sharing. I think that's a big part of your journey and of where you're at today. I would like to take some time for Q&A from the audience. So if you're ready for that, I'm going to switch to some audience questions as well.
Let's do it.
All right. So the first one, what capabilities, competencies, and leadership traits have you learned throughout your career that you believe enabled these transitions?
I love that question. I think I have an answer, Sally. I think I have an answer. I would say on the leadership side, the thing that stands out most is, and it's encapsulated in sort of an expression people used at American Express, and I'm sure elsewhere it's probably some business school thing, I don't know, but I encountered it at American Express, so that's what I associate it with, is the leader as servant idea.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, I've come to think that your ability to help, to influence, to inspire, and to motivate is built not on authority, but on how you approach the relationship and try and take the posture of a servant, someone who's helping, someone who's meant to only be there to facilitate someone else's success. And I don't think you necessarily have to limit that mindset to the people who are reporting to you or assigned to you on an org chart. I think you can bring that mentality to all your relationships at work. So I'd say with respect to leadership, it's about being a servant. With respect to like skills, abilities, and things like that, I think the phrase I'd like to use here is growth mindset. Yeah. And so I think when I'm at my best, I am thinking not so much about what external causation there is for whatever outcome happened. If I don't like the way something goes, when I'm doing it right, I'm thinking about how I could have made a difference, how I could have changed, as opposed to whatever critique I have for my counterparty, my colleague, the other person. So I don't always meet that standard. Like most of the things that I aspire to, I don't always achieve it, but I will tell you that definitely internalizing causation, focusing on what you can control, has for me been the most effective thing I can do, and has really benefited me over the years.
Yeah. Well, you're such a tremendous leader, and we have a comment and then a question as well. You know, I'm a firm believer in that leaders have vulnerabilities. So when you spoke earlier that, you know, it's something that you work at all the time and you don't have all the answers, 100% agreement, but a tougher one here. This gentleman, the CFO that he works with, has publicly stated that he doesn't make mistakes, somewhat the opposite. of what you said. How should we react to that? And do you have any thoughts on how you would work with a person like that?
Yeah,
The tougher one.
tough to be sure, Sally, tough
Yeah,
one. I
yeah,
mean, my first instinct is that I wouldn't try and persuade the guy or the woman that he or she is wrong. Like,
mhm,
to me, that feels like running into a buzzsaw.
yeah,
So I don't know if some kind of a Jedi mind trick is possible, but I'd be looking to figure out how I could convince him that this other idea he had was exactly the right thing and we should do what he thought we should have done all the time anyway, or stuff in that nature. Like,
yeah,
maybe that sounds devious, and maybe there's an element of deviousness in it. But my general instinct is to say that someone who defines themselves as someone who can't be wrong, it's not in your interest to persuade them that in fact they have been wrong or are wrong. Like, it feels like a losing proposition. So
yeah.
avoiding blame and redirecting and supporting to get to better outcomes seems to me like the best course of action. Without more details, don't know what else I could say.
But I think that's very helpful, because if we think about your career and some of the things that you've come up against, I don't think that any of them thought that they were starting out that they were wrong. So I think that you've sat in a unique seat to be able to see that as well. We have another question. Um, the audience has loved hearing you talk about change and it bringing the best out of you. The question is, for executives not as comfortable as you are operating out of their comfort zone, how would you encourage them to experiment with challenging themselves in that kind of way in order to grow?
Interesting and thoughtful question. I mean, there's nothing like testing the waters before you jump in, right? So sounds like a very sensible thing to do. Not sure that there's a one size fits all answer to this.
Mhm.
Ideas that come to mind are things like, can you take on an assignment in your current role that is maybe outside what you would normally do, but not altogether requiring a dramatic change. Also, and that would be at work. I think doing things on a volunteer level is a great way to expose yourself to unfamiliar circumstances with limited risk.
Right.
Those are two. Maybe if I had a chance to reflect, I could come up with others. But I like the idea of testing the water. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love testing the water in a volunteer role as well. You expand your network and you're probably going to learn something along the way without a lot of risk as well. So that's a great thought there. I think we have time for one more. And then we'll go to wrap up to keep everybody on time. And what inspires you as a leader?
You mean apart from food?
Yeah, right.
Um, because food is,
Food,
I
food
spend,
motivated, right?
yeah,
Like my
I
kids.
spend most of my waking moments planning my next meal. But when I'm not thinking about that, uh, I think, again, mission, big deal. So I'm sort of leaning back on some of the things I've said already. I do think, and this is probably not at all unique, but it's true. I am energized when I feel like I've had an effect. So if I come home at the end of the day and I feel like I really helped someone, or I uh, wrote something that was good, or I solved a problem, came up with a great idea, then I am inspired to do more, like having an impact. And I guess I'm challenged on days when I'm running in circles, I'm trying to get something done and nothing's working. It's just the opposite. Again, I'm afraid these are pretty bland observations, probably not very unique, but nevertheless true, Sally.
Well, I think they're very helpful to our audience for the journey that you shared with us today. And it was definitely not the most conventional route. You took some big leaps of faith and risk. And I really want to thank you for being here today on behalf of the ICEO program. We greatly appreciate the insights that you've shared with us. And we also thank our audience for listening in today, whether it's live or sometime in the future as well. So thank you all for joining and have a great day.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.
So long.
Bye.